Right, so welcome to the Toy Camera Podcast. I'm here with Steve Segal. Segal?
You were right the first time.
Right. Cool.
Steve Segal, the emphasis on the first syllable.
Would you mind?
The martial arts star.
Yeah. Would you mind telling my listeners a bit about your credentials?
Okay, well, I guess I'm the most famous project that I was involved with was Toy Story. So I was at Pixar in the mid-'90s, and I worked on Toy Story and Bug's Life and Jerry's Game. Prior to that, I worked on The Brave Little Coaster. So the through line there would be Joe Ramp. Joe Ramp was involved with all of those projects. And I think he was instrumental in helping me to get into Pixar. He's very generous. I'm sure you've heard things about Joe Ramp, but he's a very generous guy. But he would not take credit for something. He's not one. He's almost the exact opposite of Donald Trump.
Would you mind telling me a bit about how you got into animation generally?
Sure. Well, I've pretty much been doing it my whole life. I did flip books in my religious school class because it was so boring, and I went to Sabbath school, so they were trying to teach us Hebrew. And I have other flip books, and I did some filmmaking when I was about 16 with my friends. We made some live action films, but I was much more into it than they were. So animation, which I was always interested in, and the live action films always contained some animation. I was, inspired by Ray Harryhausen. And so even though I'm, terrible stop motion animator, and my monsters were made out of clay, so they were, they kind of melted under the lights. But there was always some animation element in the films. But I just started gravitating more and more to animation because you could do it by yourself.
I can see how that would be. You don't have to pay 1,000 actors and gaffers and a DP to do animation.
Well, when you're in high school, you basically just get your friends together and having fun, and I think they did have fun initially, but then I would say, hey, we got these scenes to shoot for continuity's sake, and they go, I think I'm done, because I would work on it every day. But then, for them, it'd be like, oh, this is a fun, weekend activity. But I was pretty serious about it. And then, I made films just for my own amusement, but got into some film festivals and won some awards. And then I opened up a little studio in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia. It looks like are you in Maryland?
I grew up in Maryland. Right now I'm in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay, yeah. So Virginia is a neighbor to Maryland, and my mom was from Pennsylvania. So, but anyway, I grew up on the East Coast, and let's see. So in Richmond, I had a little studio. We did commercials, and had a small staff, kind of fluctuated as the work came in. I also taught at the local university, so that would be a little steady income because the commercial work can be very unsteady, especially for a small studio. A small local. We did mostly local commercials. For either locally for the region, like Virginia, Maryland. Did some work for Florida, and I did a couple of national things for the American Forest Institute and for the Department of Energy. We actually got some contracts to do work for the Department of Energy during the Carter administration, and these were commercials on how to conserve energy. Something that's very timely now. People are talking about, solar power and all this other stuff. And I remember we had a contract to do a bunch of projects, and then when Reagan came in, all those contracts were canceled.
Huh.
And I was actually a big fan of it. It just made sense to me that there's a finite amount of fossil fuels, and it seemed to be polluting the air. That anything you can do to conserve energy made sense. Even though not that many people were talking about it, but enough. I mean, Carter was smart enough to know about it. So, it's so interesting because Carter is kind of maligned as president, and Ronald Reagan is elevated, at least among Republicans, as this, the paragon of a perfect Republican. But in my mind, he's hugely flawed. I mean, they both were. Carter had his problems. I mean, that whole Iran-Contra and the gas lines at the gas station didn't help. Right, but that's all probably before your time.
Did the Carter era environmentalism wind up feeding into the Brave Little Toaster in conception?
Well, I had nothing to do with the film, the content of the film, so I don't know. You'd have to ask Joe and Jerry and then maybe Thomas Fish, who wrote the novelette that it's based on. But I doubt it. We could check and see when was that written. But it could have been written right around that time.
Could you tell me a bit about your experience working on it?
The Brave Little Toaster?
Yep.
Sure. I think it was, it might have been Chris Cassidy. Chris Cassidy had a little studio called Roto Effects of America. And he's a really great guy if you want to look for people for your podcast who are not well known, but, he worked on Star Wars and Tron, and so, he's a really good guy. And I think he recommended me for it. I was new, I fairly recently arrived in Hollywood. I worked in Virginia, and then when I felt like I wasn't getting any, I was kind of just doing the same thing. And I think if I'm going to progress at all, I'm going to have to move to either New York or LA. So LA is where the animation industry was. So I moved out there, and I think Mark Dindal was scheduled to do special effects. But Mark Dindal, you're probably familiar with the name, directed Cats Don't Dance and The Emperor's New Groove.
Oh.
Prior to that, he was a top-notch effects animator.
Huh.
So he had done, I don't know his credentials, but I know he did some work with the Brave Little Toaster, but he didn't want to move to Taiwan. It was developed at Disney, and then they said, they were having a lot of upheavals at the time, changing in management. I think that was when the sort of Don Bluth crew was kind of warring against maybe the Ron and John teams. And so, for whatever reason, Brave Little Toaster wasn't seen as a strong enough prospect. And so they abandoned it. But the people who were involved, Jerry Reese and Joe Raft, other people who were at Disney, they really believed in it. And so they often got involved with this other company. Well, I guess it must have been somehow connected with Disney. It was called Hyperion, which is named after the street Disney had his studio on. So anyway, it's kind of a long-winded story, but they just did. Mark Dindal didn't want to move to Taiwan. They had to do production in Taiwan. They said, okay, we can't afford to use all American talent. We're going to do a lot of the production work in Taiwan at this studio called Cuckoo's Nest that was set up by James Wong. And that was set up to do Hanna-Barbera cartoons. At the time they were working on the Snorks. So they said, look, but we want to have an American crew. We want to have American animators and supervisors, and they wanted me to be in charge of effects and also operate the camera. And I had never worked on a production. I had no connection with Disney. So I was the only one of the Americans on the crew who didn't go to Cal Arts. So a little bit of an outsider, but luckily Joe Ramp was there, and he's such a generous guy that he made me feel welcome. And really everybody there, I don't think they did it consciously. I think it was more me feeling like an outsider because I didn't go to Cal Arts. But everybody there was just really nice. Jerry Reese and Rebecca Reese, Jerry who directed, really, really great guys. Randy Cartwright, who became famous for doing the carpet in Aladdin, he was there. He was very generous. He had a lot of animation wisdom. He knew a lot of tricks.
Mm. Could you tell me a bit about? Could you tell me a bit about what it means to be an effects animator?
Yeah, it actually was more like supervising the effects photography, which is figuring out if you want to put a fog filter on something, if you're going to do something like a lighting effect, how much you're going to overexpose it, and various things. I mean, there's one scene where a car drives through, I think there's a fantasy scene where Blanket thinks he's seeing the master, and the car drives through and shatters the dream, and there's a kind of like a wipe. And so I figured out how to do that. And I had done that with my own films. Jerry had seen one of my personal films that had some effects in it, and I had done it, in 16 millimeter. And he kind of figured out, well, if you can do that, you could probably deal with the stuff, the equipment that they have in Taiwan, which is not quite up to the standards of American studios. So yeah, effects animation is generally called anything that's not character animation, which is, water and the wind and leaves blowing and anything that's not character. But I didn't actually put pencil to paper very much at all. I remember animating some shadows on a couple scenes, but mostly I was just, working out exposures and plotting camera moves.
Interesting.
So even though my title on that was scene planner. So I did a lot of just figuring out the camera moves.
How different is it working a camera for that sort of thing compared to a live action film?
Well, other than these sort of personal films, I've never been involved with a real live action film, so I wouldn't be one to say. I mean, obviously, animation is quite different because you don't have crew, you don't have light. We have a light to shoot the animation, but the labor-intensive part comes in the drawing, and I'm probably aware now that animation is in production, whereas live action is virtually shut down. So they are able to act. I think because of the technology, like the technology we're using right now for this this call, this podcast, because I'm on my cell phone, but the technology, the speakers and stuff. I mean, I guess when they're doing that, they'll send some professional recording equipment to a voice talent's home, but you're not in a studio. So yeah, they're very different. I mean, there are obviously similarities. And you write a script and you try to do a 3-act structure for a feature film. But yeah, the actual production is pretty different.
Could you tell me a bit about who the biggest influences on your animation style have been? How would you characterize your style?
Well, oh boy. Two, I think. Walt Disney, which is, I don't think my style is like Disney, but I grew up loving that stuff. I loved the fluidity of the animation and the believability of it, the attention to detail. So, I'm not as big a fan. I know I get people that have rapturous about, like, the Flintstones or Huckleberry Hound, which I watched when I was a kid. But I knew that wasn't as well done as either the Warner Brothers cartoons or especially the Disney cartoons. And the other would be Norman McLaren, who was the primary animator at the National Film Board of Canada. And his work borders on the abstract, although he's able to have some. His films always feel like they have a beginning, middle, and end. That they have some kind of message. Sometimes they tell a real story. Sometimes they involve characters, but often they're just abstract shapes. But he's able to make them really interesting and compelling, and he's fascinating. And I try to kind of bridge in the work that I think is successful. I'm sort of telling a story, a little bit of a story, but also adding some abstraction. And Disney did that. I think he did it as well as anybody in some of the films, like The Three Caballeros, into these flights of fantasy, where, one thing will change into something else. And but they're still, characters, and they're still telling a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just that The Three Caballeros it's kind of, I know it's famous for codifying this trio involving Donald Duck, but one of the nicer touches about it is the way it does showcase the true artistry of Disney animators. I talked about this a bit with Dave Proxima, how you could really tell that it was artists working on the films in, for example, Dumbo, the pink elephants on parade sequence. The way that sequence just wonderfully dips into different art movements like German Expressionism, the way it's just sort of freely experimental.
Yeah, Segal on Parade is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I love that sequence. And there's also a short called Bumble Boogie that is done to a jazz version of the Flight of the Bumblebee. And there's another one called After You've Gone, which uses the Benny Goodman Quartet. And it's an abstraction on musical instruments, because, you can hear the instruments, kind of like the opening of Fantasia. But one thing changes into another, but it's just really fun to watch. But yeah, absolutely. The Disney really did experiment with a lot of things. But Three Caballeros is also a real touchstone for successfully combining animation with live action.
What's your favorite Disney movie?
Well, I think when I was growing up, I was really impressed with the short, The Old Mill.
Oh, yeah. That was the really spooky one, right?
But I think you could make a case that it was a test to see, can you make a serious, emotional film, not a silly, funny cartoon? They knew they could make cartoons. Could you make something that would, express a mood? And you sit and you watch The Old Mill, and you're in that mill, and you're in the storm, and you feel emotional about it. I do. You feel scared for the birds. And I think you want to make sure, can you get an audience involvement in a cartoon? Because he wanted to make a feature. And Snow White was not the first animated feature.
I think that was The Adventures of Prince Ahmed.
Well, Adventures of Prince Ahmed is the oldest one that you can still watch, but there were a couple that came even before that. There's one called El Apostle that came from Argentina, and it's long since gone. But that and Prince Ahmed are kind of episodic. The El Apostle is apparently a political cartoon with a bunch of little vignettes, and Prince Ahmed is sort of like Scheherazade. It's Arabian Nights stories, and they're all in silhouette. So you can watch that and be truly mesmerized by this amazing Lottie Reidinger did this beautiful silhouette animation. But you're probably not going to get too involved in the story. Silhouettes can be a little distancing. And but her technique is amazing.
Absolutely.
But I think you can still watch Snow White and be moved. Certainly you can watch Pinocchio or Bambi and be moved. For some reason, I just really love Snow White. I just love the dwarfs. Their personalities are so distinct.
Mm, definitely. Snow White, very important film story-wise as far as delivering content that could entertain both children and adults.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, I think that there's a legacy of that. I think Chaplin films cross over that. Disney, all the animators, Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett, they all studied Chaplin and Keaton and Harold Lloyd. They loved the silent comedians because animation is a very visual form. Try not to tell too much of the story with dialogue.
Definitely. I think that if you were kind of looking to merge visual comedy with kind of like poetic dramatic action, then Keaton, Chaplin are really good inspirations to go to, because one of the things that I personally really like about Chaplin is the way that he's able to merge kind of visual poetry in with his comedy at the same time. There's always like some kind of deeper, profound point lurking beneath the surface, like especially in something like The Kid, which I know was a very personal film for Chaplin.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm with you there. I guess they just showed The General. Oh yeah,
I love The General. That's one of my favorite films.
Fantastic film. There's some great scenes in there. It's really an epic. At TCM, Brad Bird is doing he's doing The Essential. So I love to listen to Brad Bird because he's a brilliant film analyst as well as a great writer-director.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched that, because I've always been on the fence, like, who do you like better, Keaton or Chaplin? And that's usually whoever I'm watching at the time. But after The General, I said, you know what, I think ultimately I like Chaplin better because he does have that sort of emotional response, the same thing that I got from Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And Keaton, as brilliant as he is, and General is amazing, these epic scenes and the thing when the bridge goes down. A better film, hopefully you've seen it, Sherlock Jr.
Yes. We've actually... I got one of my degrees in MCS, and that gets brought up a number of times for the way that it comments on how people are like taught to act by film and transportation theory into film. It's like a very salient theory that the movie puts forth.
Whoa, that's really interesting. So what's your degree? I didn't quite hear that.
I got my degrees in MCS, and the other one was in film.
MCS?
Media and Communication Studies.
Okay. Great.
Mm.
So you'd be better to answer these questions than I would.
Oh, no. I have not made it nearly as far as you have, to put it lightly.
Okay, well anyway, so yeah, just the Chaplin films, not to take anything away from Keaton, I'll watch Keaton all day long. Some of the shorts are amazing. But, City Lights, The Great Dictator, Modern Times, these are just fantastic films.
The Great Dictator is another really stirring example of comedy mixed with metaphor, like the scene where Chaplin as Hitler is essentially playing with the world as a toy, as like this inflatable ball. It's just a wonderful sequence.
Yeah, very famous. Yeah, and I think he does that very impassioned speech at the end, and it's brilliantly performed, doubly amazing since he was so well known as a silent performer. And to hear him speak so impassioned and with complete confidence, somebody, because so many silent actors were just scared to death of the microphone.
Absolutely.
But Chaplin just stood up and said his piece. We could use him right now.
I mean, there were no small number of careers that were killed by the talkies.
Oh, yeah.
Though a number of big high profile examples, of course, lasted beyond silence into talkies. Like, I remember Garbo Speaks being like a huge hook for the first film where she appeared. Greta Garbo.
Well, yeah. I mean, that was a tagline. Was that the name of the film?
Oh, it wasn't the name of the film. I don't remember the actual name of the film at the moment.
Yeah, I think there was a tagline for Ninotchka, or I don't know, some film that she was in. That's the first time she speaks, and so they, Garbo Speaks, and she was pretty amazing. She had this, sultry voice, and people didn't seem to mind the accent.
Definitely. Would you mind telling me... Oh, what were you going to say?
Hardy are interesting because they were really successful in the silent days, but today when you think of them, you think of their voices. You think of them, Ollie saying, well, here's another nice mess you've gotten us into. And Sandler saying, oh, sorry, Ollie. And, it's just like they identify their characters as voices, but they started as silent actors. They made the transition seamlessly. I don't think they get enough credit.
Definitely not. Would you mind telling me a bit about your time on Toy Story?
Yeah, sure. So, let me think how that came about. I'm trying not to make this too long, but I had seen John Lasseter's student film called Lady in the Lamp.
Ah.
And I guess the takeoff on Lady in the Tramp. It was a student film, the pencil test. They did Cal Arts, and I really liked it. And so his name kind of stuck in my head. And then I read in Starlog magazine that there's some people who were experimenting with doing character animation on computer. And at the time, there was some really amazing stuff being done in computer, and that may have been about the time of Tron, maybe even before. I know there was stuff. I remember seeing like images of tanks that were, perfect character animation. When people tried it, it was very stiff. And I thought, wow, that guy had the film had a lot of the qualities that you want to see in a film. It had great humor, great personality, and heart. You kind of cared about this little lamb character. And I thought, he might be able to bring something to computer animation that's been missing. And so I went to SIGGRAPH, and I'd only heard the name. I didn't know what he looked like, but I heard there was a panel, character animation in computer, that Bill Croyer was running. Bill Croyer had worked on Tron, and later on, I think by that time he had made Fern Gully. He directed Fern Gully. So after the lecture was over, I actually went up to Bill Croyer and I said, "Hey, you mentioned John Lasseter in your lecture, and I wanted to meet him, and then I realized I didn't even know what I'm supposed to ask." And I said, "Can you tell me what he looks like?" That seems like a stupid question. Are you very good police sketch artist? Can you make a sketch for me? So Bill said, "Well, he's sitting right over there." And he was sitting at a table after the lecture was over, chatting with Chris Wedge, who was one of the founders of Blue Sky. So I went up and introduced myself to the two of them. And I had a film that I had made. This was the same film that Jerry Reese had seen that got me hired on The Brave Little Toaster. And it was not computer animated, so it's not really appropriate to be shown at SIGGRAPH. But I showed it anyway. I put up posters, and people came to my screening. John came, and so that was kind of my introduction to him. And having worked on The Brave Little Toaster, Joe Lamp had worked with John early on when they were both at Disney, and they were old friends. So I had a couple of connections. And Joe, I kept in I did. Actually, let me back up a little bit. I may have the timeline wrong, but I believe what happened is John. I actually kept in touch with John as well after that first meeting at SIGGRAPH, and he called me and said, we're putting together a feature. Send you reel. And I went, wow, the director contacted me. I think that's a really good sign. And then I didn't hear anything. Weeks went by, I didn't hear anything. And I went, well, I guess they hated my reel. It turns out that was what's known as Black Monday. That was the period where Disney, they got my reel about the time when Disney shut down Toy Story. So, whether or not I got hired is the least of their worries, because the whole film was about to be shut down. So I really just forgot about it. I usually, don't apply to any place twice, but Pixar was special, and I actually applied 3 times. But the third time, I think I applied the second time and didn't hear anything, and then I was actually doing a lecture up in the Bay Area, and I visited Joe at Pixar, and I said, look, here's my reel. This is my latest reel. Not that you're interested, because I've already been rejected twice. And so that was the time that I got hired. And it was just sort of an offhanded thing where I said, well, as long as we're here, here's my reel. And of course it was a VHS tape. That's what we had back then. And I didn't know it was all the mechanizations that were going on in the background, that, the film got shut down, and then John basically laid off everybody in the staff except for Joe and Pete Docter and Andrew Stanton, and they went and rewrote the whole movie. They spent like 2 weeks and rewrote the whole thing, because what they had was, there's lots of accounts of this, so you can look that up. So then, all that was supposed to be just for that one film, but staying on to work on Bug's Life. But let's see if I can give you any ideas. I mean, the first day, it was a little all right, I'm not sure what to do. Pete Docter was there. This is an interesting side note. Pete Docter, based on a different film, I got hired to teach computer animation at Cal Arts, and one of my students was Pete Docter. And he was, without a doubt, he was my best student. Even then, you could see that this guy's going places. So that probably didn't hurt. And then once I arrived at Pixar, they said, we're gonna train you how to use our system. Pete turned out to be my trainer. So we switched roles. So I learned the system, and then it was very haphazard early on. They would give you shots randomly, a little bit from this sequence, a little bit from that sequence. They had the Army Man sequence finished, except for the cutaways to the main toys. The reason that the Iron Man sequence, there was not a lot at stake in the design of the characters. They knew what the characters were going to look like. They were going to look like just the plastic molded military figures, whereas they were still deciding on the look of Woody and Buzz and Ham and Potato Head, and also they had to sculpt them, to model them, and then rig them. So that's the painful part of computer animation. You have to go through this long process just to be able to start animating. You can't just with a drawing animation. If you have an idea what the character looks like, you can start roughing in the animation. You can start, and usually if you've got the character design, you at least don't have to rig it. You just start animating. But yeah, you have to, and then you have to go through the testing process because things are always going wrong with the model. So they had the Iron Man probably done first. So they were smart enough to know, to structure the production like that, even though that was their first film. But they were still writing a lot. They were still changing a lot. There's a couple of things that I don't hear mentioned much stories, so I'll mention them now. One of the things I remember was they had the claw machine.
Oh yeah.
And in the claw machine were a whole variety of toys, which is my experience with a claw machine. It was very colorful, and this was, all different sizes, and then I remember Andrew Stanton said, okay, it's all going to be the same toy. And I said, well, that's a terrible idea. That's something because I didn't get the whole concept that it's going to be like a cult. And they really did the best with that, but yeah, I remember that was not in there originally. Another story, and that's probably been mentioned a couple of times, was that the sort of the climax of the film was when they light the rocket. Woody uses Buzz's helmet to light the rocket, to light the fuse on the firecracker. That was not in the original cut. Originally, he strikes the match and lights the rocket, and they blast off. And they had preview screenings, and I remember them coming back and talking about that they had a screening at a theater that had seats that had a cup holder that had a swivel. I don't know why, but it's the kind of thing you'd have in your car to keep it upright if you're on an angle. But it's just a way to put the cup in, and it was on a hinge or something. And at certain moments, they would play with that hinge, and so they noticed that was one place. I don't think that's the case. I think that was something else, but that was funny that they were using that as a guide. Okay, we need to tighten this up. In that case, they got a lot of. Everybody knew that was going to happen. They said, well, as soon as he put the match in Woody's holster, they said, well, he's going to use that match to light the rocket. People could just see that coming. So they said, we're going to have to change that. And, that's when the car goes by and blows out the match. And then he uses the helmet. What's interesting is that the helmet amplifying the sun is kind of a callback to a scene where Sid is torturing Woody by using a magnifying glass. And you would think, well, they would add that scene in order to make the gag work of the helmet. But in fact, no, that scene was already there. They already had the scene with Sid torturing, and so it was the perfect way to feed that right into that. And I do remember when they were tossing out ideas for Toy Story 2, one of them was that Buzz Lightyear toys get recalled because kids are using them to burn things. So they actually had that as one of the ideas. It was an interesting idea. It could probably not. It's probably better. The Toy Story 2 is probably better for what it is now. But the other story, this is maybe my favorite one. But I haven't heard it mentioned what's that, but Larry Daly's, and very close to the scene I just talked about, when the rocket blasts off and they shoot up in the air, and I think the rocket's about to explode, and I think Woody says, "This is when we explode," and Buzz Lightyear calls back to his catchphrase, "Not today," and opens his wings and cuts through the tape and releases the rocket, and then because his wings are open, he's flying, and Woody says, "Buzz, you're flying," and in the movie, he says, "This isn't flying, this is falling with style," which is a callback to what Woody says about, it's kind of a derogatory, he goes, "That's not falling with style," which is a great line because it kind of indicates that Buzz is accepting Woody, now they've become friends. Well, that's not the way it was. I think, I'm trying to remember, is it Ash Brannon animated it? Yeah, it might have been an Ash Brannon scene, but the scene was, he says, "Buzz, you're flying." Buzz says, "Well, technically and gliding, but let's not spoil the moment.
Mm.
So, good line. But Pete Docter in the dailies, Pete Docter stood up and said, you know what he should say? And they seemed calling the style. And again, it's kind of like, of course. It's almost like the earlier line was a setup for the line that was not in the script. That was Pete Docter right there having an inspiration, genius that he is.
Mm.
But I was in dailies when he said that, so I know that's a true story.
Mm.
So, and that's probably more I can think of them, but those are probably the best.
Mm. Could you tell me a bit about working on A Bug's Life?
Yeah, well, Bug's Life was a particular challenge because there were a lot more characters. I mean, there were all these crowd scenes, and they had a whole crowd department. And the ground was uneven, whereas everything in Toy Story, almost everything was flat.
Mm.
So it was always a challenge to... I remember my very first shot in that was a scene where I think they're called blueberries, they're little Girl Scout ants.
Mm.
And they're running, and they're kind of like running around a rock.
Mm.
And one of them jumps onto a stalk of a clover and slides down like a fireman pole.
Mm.
And that's my gag. So, and I remember it was just a case of there were new tools, and so when you load up the scene, you can see, I think a flat reference of the ground and the characters, but nothing else. And they said, okay, so when you want to see what's else in the scene, you have to click these, and you can turn them on and off, because you can't work with all the vegetation and all the characters. The computer just couldn't handle it.
Mm.
And so, I clicked one of the buttons, and there's a big clover sitting there right in the front. And I go, well, what else are you going to do? She's going to have to slide down it. And then, they came through, and it's called walkthrough. They have 2 times when they evaluate your work. They have dailies in the morning. I think it's really early, like 8 a.m.
Mm.
And the whole staff, or the whole animation staff, sits and watch the scenes projected on a screen, and then walk through where they come to your cubicle, and you talk one-on-one. Sometimes it's John Lasseter and Andrew Stanton. Sometimes John's busy. Quite often John is busy in a story conference, or even meeting with executive Hershey, or because they're always trying to make these promotional tie-in deals.
Mm.
So just like Andrew Stanton, and maybe one of the animation directors like Glenn McQueen. So I remember they kept saying, okay, well, you're going to have to move this guy back so you can really see that. So that was the first indication they really liked what I was doing, because they were kind of restructuring the scene to make sure you would notice or slide down that. And it was really just, as soon as I clicked on that clover, I go, well, I got a big clover right in front of the rock. What else can you do? Plus, they were smart enough. That's the great thing about Pixar being sort of built pretty much with an animation. And Ed Catmull always wanted to be an animator. He's basically the founder of the company.
Mm.
Like, I've worked at places where, they'll say, well, there's a clover there, and they'll just have the static thing. But they had controls in the clover, so, when she jumps on, it bends with her weight, and then it kind of bends back. It's very subtle, but, as an animator, I really appreciated that they gave us those kind of controls, because, if you were drawing it, you would automatically make things move. It's just, when somebody jumps on something, you want to have it react. Mm. So, my hat's off to them. Everybody does it now, but back, in the late 90s, that was still something that's pretty rare, and, computers weren't that powerful.
Mm.
And that was my first shot, so that was a good one to start on, but it was a little bit of a learning experience to say, I've got to turn on all this stuff to make sure, nobody's running right through a rock or through a piece of vegetation. trouble. But I mean, that's a long time ago. Computers change very fast.
I mean, I think you were kind of lucky to be on the forefront of that in a way, and still like young enough to adjust easily. Like I remember hearing this whole story about how hesitant Hayao Miyazaki was to take up computer animation until I think Princess Mononoke came along, because he was so committed to the thoroughly hand-drawn style having come up in like the anime scene of the 60s.
Oh, yes, I definitely agree. I was very lucky. I keep thinking about, again, my reverence for Snow White. I always wished I could have been there when they made the first animated feature. And I really did want to work on Toy Story. I said, that's the first computer, that's the closest I'll ever get to Snow White. Is the first computer animated feature. So that's, why, and like I said, I've applied places, and one rejection is all I need, and then I'll just continue with, hey, you don't like my stuff, then screw you. So, but, I should be more aware that it changes from day to day, and I tell my students that, like, just if there's a place you want to work, just keep at it, because you never know who's going to look at your reel. It might be a different person. It might be in a different mood. They might have looked at two reels that were very similar, and they picked the person that they looked at first. It's a crapshoot. But yeah, I really wanted to work on that, and it's interesting you should say. I was actually the oldest animator on A Bug's Life. And I would have been the oldest animator on Toy Story if not for Bud Lucky. Bud Lucky, who did this amazing work on Sesame Street, and they made Boundin', and also wrote and sang the song in the Pixar short Boundin'. A great guy. Unfortunately, he's passed away a few years ago, but it was another person that was a real education to talk to. But I had been fooling around with computer animation since the late 70s. I had a Commodore 64, and I actually wrote a program that could do some very primitive animation. Because there wasn't anything that could use to animate, but I kind of knew that you could use calculations to move things around. Nothing like, kind of tools that they have today. It's extremely primitive.
I don't think that Toy Story is too far off from Snow White as far as being a landmark. Like, just speaking anecdotally in cinephile circles, it's talked about as like a masterpiece of its own kind.
Yeah, I have to agree. It has a lot of the same qualities. I mean, there's definitely a spirit of we're not really sure what we're doing. We think it's a good film. At a certain point, I remember looking at a cut of the film. It was maybe 80% done, and I said, if this doesn't do well, there's something wrong with the audience, because there's nothing wrong with this film. Sometimes you're too close to it, but I just thought, it's funny, it's moving, it's a great buddy story. It has a lot of clever ideas, and really, John Lasseter gets a lot of the credit. They made a lot of really significant decisions. Yes, Joe Ampt and Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter and all the people who were involved, they all, everybody put in. But yeah, I think it's very similar. But people working on, I've heard these accounts, people working on Snow White and really believing involved and really believing in the project and putting in extra time. And there was that feeling that, we need to make this the best we can make it. Also feeling like, well, I kind of liked computer animation. I mean, I liked John's short films. I loved Tin Toy. I loved Luxo Jr. I thought, this is the future. I want to see more of this.
Mm.
And I didn't want to ruin it. I wanted to make sure that we do get more of it. And, for better or worse, now people say, it's all your fault. You killed hand-drawn animation. Sorry, it didn't mean to. John loves hand-drawn animation, as do I. When he got to run the Disney studio, he actually put Princess and the Frog in production and Winnie the Pooh. Unfortunately, they just didn't do that well. I don't know why. But I love Princess and the Frog. I should have done much better.
Same. I really love Annika Nani Rose's performance as the lead. She also starred in Dreamgirls. She's got a wonderful singing voice.
Yeah, there's some great songs in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if you already. I do remember the trailer was not very good, and I was shocked to find out that the people I got to meet, John Musker, and he said they had no say on how the film was promoted. That's a different department at Disney. And I was shocked that, I couldn't look at it and say, no, this is, you're selling this like it's a raucous comedy. But this is a serious, this is a film with deeper emotions. No, they had this idea, here's the audience we need to get. A lot of those people, they just crunch the numbers. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into it. Sometimes they get it right.
I gotcha.
They did a pretty good job with Toy Story. The promotion on Toy Story. John may have had some say on that, because Pixar at the time was a completely independent company. They weren't part of Disney. And Disney was just their distributor. We had a deal that Pixar would make the film, Disney would distribute it.
Right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there any place in particular that my listeners can reach you on Twitter or Facebook, Instagram?
I'm on Facebook. There's I get friend requests sometimes, and I don't always accept them if I don't know them. But if it looks like somebody who has a real strong interest in animation, maybe I do have a couple of my films on YouTube. So, unfortunately, if you type in Steve Segal, even if you spell it correctly, Stevesegal, which is not the way the martial arts actor, that's who you'll get. And if you put Steve Segal animation, you'll get animation of Steven Seagal, the martial arts actor. People have made animated films of him. So I think one of the names I use is Segal Tunes, Segaltoons, and that may get you to my films. The ones that I'm the most proud of are Dance of the Stumblers. People can go there and give it a thumbs up. And somebody's posted my epic, the one that Jerry Reese saw, and the one that I showed at SIGGRAPH, called Futuropolis. But I didn't post it, but I haven't asked for it to be taken down because I figure, people will see it. But I guess if the numbers get up there, I should take it down, and I should have them take it down, and I should get the credit for it.
Definitely. Right.
I haven't really pursued that. The whole YouTube idea is pretty foreign to me. A friend, an animator named Patrick Smith, he's really talented. He just got, I don't know what the number is. He got some amazing number, like 3 million. So on one of his films, so bravo to him. He's got it figured out.
Right. Thank you so much for your time. Would love to have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, I had a whole other career as an independent filmmaker, and I just finished one. It's I've submitted it to about 20 festivals so far. Although a lot of these festivals are being canceled, but we'll see what happens. But it's just finished, and so we'll hopefully, and it's done using the same kind of techniques as Pixar. It's a CG animated film with a little bit of a story. Hopefully people like it. I hope it's fun to watch.
Well, good luck on that. I wish you all the best.
Misfit is the name of the film.
I'm sure it's great. You said it's called Misfit?
Misfit.
Hmm.
Yeah, I won't say anything about it. It's not been posted anywhere because a lot of these festivals won't accept it if it can be seen publicly. So you'll just have to watch for it at your, nearby film festival. And then maybe in a few years I can post it. After it's finished, it's run.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Have a nice weekend. Stay safe and healthy.
Yes, you too. Yes, and thanks for asking me. I was honored to be asked.
No prob. You're a very interesting guy.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to yammer away and talk about yourself. I think everybody likes to do that.
Absolutely.